From terrible reviews online, to over a 50% dislike ratio. Here is the whisper, what some call, the worst horror game on Roblox, but does it actually live up to its name? Chapter 1 begins with the player being tasked with finding the car keys to a car I assume broke down. It's never really explained how we lost the car keys, but okay. After glitching and falling through a lake, we bring the car keys back to the car, and are placed into a dark and spooky forest, and are tasked with talking to the soul. Once you've walked through the forest a bit, you are introduced to what I assume is the soul, and are asked to collect 6 orbs to break them free. Wait. Whilst you search for the orb, you are chased by this. I must say the entity is probably the buggiest I've ever seen in a horror game, and it was quite funny watching her vanish in front of you whilst collecting the orbs. Once we finished that, a portal opened up and we were magically taken to a cave. Before we continue though, I'll clarify the soul at the start was never mentioned again, so this whole story is just confusing. Anyway, back to the cave. As you walk down the cave, hands start to pop up on your left and right, which I must admit is a cool feature. After walking for a while, the cave opens up to what appears to be a ritual, and you must find a code for a keypad on the floor. I'm gonna be honest, I still have no idea how to find the code, but hey. My friends found it and the cave door began to open upwards and lead on to the next path. I must point out the details on the cave roof here were spectacular. After some walking, we eventually realize this area is a maze and find the way out in a few short minutes. Okay, so now we're in a lab? This game gets extremely confusing sometimes, I swear. Now this level was quite interesting. You could hear the sounds of the enemy before actually seeing it, and still also hear the sound of birds outside. It's at this point we spot the entity and it gives chase, only to stop quite quickly. Now yes, as you might be able to tell, this level is another maze. This is, as you'll soon see, quite a trend within this game. After running away from the enemy, we go to find all the power boxes until eventually we find all 3 and absolutely nothing happens. This is until one of us spots a prompt on the enemy and I decide to hide behind whatever this is and steal the keys from her. I must say, if none of us were actively looking for something on her, then we may have never spotted this, making the whole section a bit confusing. It's at this point we sprint for the exit and are again teleported to another random location, with one of our skins being reset, and some nice lore is dumped upon us before climbing out of what I assume is a drain pipe. And with that comes the end of chapter 1. But before we move on to the next chapter, I'd like to give a quick breakdown of everything wrong with chapter 1. Now I must admit the start was very promising, the atmosphere was nice and the graphics looked good, but glitching and dying because I fell through the lake was a big break in the immersion. Now the next area was the same graphics wise, but the soul in the middle looked silly and contrasted the detailed environment around it. The entity was very buggy too, which caused another break in the immersion and even caused me to laugh at how buggy it was, making it more of a comedy than a horror. The cave part was great, although a small complaint is that the cave roof could use a bit more detail. Next up, the lab. This is probably the worst part so far. I think repeating 2 mazes just makes the game feel less like a game and more like a chore. But as you'll soon see, that will become an even bigger problem in the future. Chapter 2 starts off in a forest with a path leading to who knows where, and hey, look at that. Another find and collect objective. After some walking, you come across some buildings, a bedroom, and then eventually find a key, unlock a house and collect a lever from inside. Then after enough walking to go through a whole body transformation, you find a place to put the lever, which might I add is in the most confusing place possible, and enter, in my opinion, the worst part of the game so far, the caves. Oh, and look at that, more collecting. Now this part only took around 2 minutes, which isn't so bad, but the next part, ah man, this was awful. We spent around 20 minutes straight running around in a stone maze looking for skulls. Now I've got this sped up here so you can truly see how long it took, but to be honest we almost gave up at this point, but decided to keep going so we can get this video out for you guys. But finally, after what felt like hours, we found all the skulls. Are you kidding me? After all that time we have to go back into the maze to find something else? I'm gonna cut out this part of just running around, but I must say it took us at least another 10 minutes to find this room just so we can progress. After all of that, a rope finally appears and allows us to progress into a house. No clue how a house ended up in a cave, but okay. This house part was quite confusing. You had to find some keys in order to open doors, to find more keys until you eventually find a knife, to cut these webs in order to get hit by a Russian CS:GO flashbang, and then moving into a haunted mansion. This is another short section of the game where you find a key to get into a room, where a Roomba finds you a key to escape. It's unique, I do gotta say. Okay, so now we're underwater? Going on a world tour here, I guess. Another 8 things to do. Phew, finally over with. Now here's the ending to chapter 2. Now another quick summary of the problems in this chapter. The levels don't match up at all, and it breaks any immersion a player may have, like how does a mansion get inside of a cave? Now if I were to make a game like this, I'd try to keep the progression in a way where all the different sections match together seamlessly, in order to keep the flow of the game smooth and make it feel slightly realistic. Another giant problem within this chapter is mazes, especially the find and collect ones. When we played through the game, you go through 30 minutes of walking randomly until you find the exit, just to realize you have to go back to find more stuff. The whole game feels like a chore by the second chapter, and it leaves you excited to beat the game rather than find out what's happening next. Speaking of finding out what happens next. When joining chapter 3, we were all hoping for a change in gameplay, but after spending another 20 minutes finding candles in a maze, we are rewarded with a cutscene and plonked in some sort of storage warehouse. This is probably a highlight of the game. It involves math and problem solving. Now I know most people would hate this, but believe me, it's a nice break from the constant mazes. After completing the puzzles and putting the code into the pad, we are now in a house. I know you're getting bored now, so I'll speed it up. We walk around the house, leave, and are made to collect more skulls, which took another 20 minutes, and are now in a haunted mansion again. You collect some keys, open some bird cages, and after unlocking them all, you finally finish the game. Now with the game completed, let's go over all the main problems of the game and how I'd fix them. Well, to start off, here's a short list of the problems. Mazes, too much walking, find and collect mazes, buggy entities, mazes, unclear instructions, and did I mention mazes? So yeah, I think now you've got an idea of the problems, but how does the dev fix them? Well, first off, I think this game is pretty much unfixable at this point, but if they decide to make another game or chapter in the future, I definitely recommend finding something different to do than just mazes over and over again. Instead, I'd try to find more unique puzzles and other obstacles, because otherwise the game is just a walking maze simulator. A good example of this would be a game I'll be looking at next video, which has some unique puzzles to beat to progress, and other games such as Apeirophobia. This way the player is more focused on the future of the game instead of how long it will take to finish. Now, unclear goals is a bit of a smaller problem, as mentioned earlier in the video. If we randomly didn't bump into this entity, we never would have known what to do, so simply just make the goals more obvious, I guess. But with that comes the end of the video. Before you click off, make sure to subscribe, as our next video coming out will be the craziest yet.